myself to use any mods like usual. Well, unless you count the zoom mod, but that's just for the camera. Don't worry about that. The first thing I decided to do was figure out how to lock the camera to a 2D perspective. I wrote a plugin that fires every time the player moves and forces their head to turn directly north. This actually already made the game feel very two-dimensional, but it still didn't look very two-dimensional. So the next thing I did was make the player completely invisible and attach an obscure item to their head. Then I made a custom resource pack that converts that item's model into a big flat rectangle. No, I didn't just do this because rectangles are cool, although I know they are, but because this allows us to paste any 2D sprite we want on top of the player. So I temporarily downloaded a sprite sheet from Super Mario World just to test and make sure everything worked the way I wanted. And it did! Look at how beautiful our double Mario is! Yes, that's totally what's supposed to happen! Okay, you caught me, that's not supposed to happen, but I talked to my friend Tux Bodai and he taught me how to animate textures and everything worked out peachy. Get it? But the Mario sprites were just temporary, so now I need to make my entire own Minecraft Steve sprite sheet. I started by just copying over pieces from the Steve skin, but I thought it was a little too contrasty, so I ended up redrawing him with really flat colors to look more like a 2D sprite. I thought it turned out pretty well. I replaced the Mario sprites with the new Steve ones, and it actually looked a lot better than I expected it to. Well, except for the fact that the GUI textures broke, but we can just ignore that, just don't look over there. Next, we need to make our 3D world 2D to match our character. I decided to start by filling in the sky with light blue concrete to cover up the extra faces of all the blocks around it. And I added barrier blocks for all the spots Steve needs to stand. However, I did notice that now since we're standing on barrier blocks, every time we jump and land on them, these yucky red particles fly out all over the place. So I simply just deleted the barrier texture. It's all gone now, nobody there.
Success!
I also changed the color of the sky blocks to make it feel more like the actual Minecraft sky. Next, we need to fix whatever you call this. To do this, I offset the models of every single one of these blocks and moved them out of the wall so Steve could walk on them. I couldn't figure out how to change the model of the chest, so I googled it and it turns out you literally just can't. So let's just pretend that chests don't exist in our game. We're not gonna, just don't worry about those. The stairs wound up being very tricky since they can be rotated, so I had to create a custom block state for every single rotation of stair in the game and a custom parent model to match. But after I did all that, it actually worked. I started grinding away making custom models for every block I was using until my roommate Fundy came in and told me how much of an idiot I am.
You're an idiot.
He told me why make a custom model for every single block I use when I could just drag the sky forwards and not have to make any custom models.
Failure.
So I deleted my past like 2 hours of work and just made one single sky model that took like 2 minutes to make. Yeah, I'm pretty stupid, but I learned a lot about models. Now that we have all of our 2D blocks ready to build with, we need to make a fully playable 2D level. I started by flipping the world we have so far, since walking left to right is more common in 2D platformers, and I made this neat little parkour section. I built up some ladders to help any players that fail the parkour, and I added a little pond before it to safely teach the player they can jump before giving them a challenge. I also added smoke to the chimney. Yay! At this point, I had pretty much every tool I needed to start designing a full 2D level. But a game where all you do is jump is actually kind of boring, so I tried to think of what stuff in Minecraft I could bring to our game to make it more fun. I ended up implementing an entire building system. Left and right click, place and break the block directly in front of you. Crouching lowers your aim by 1 to 2 blocks depending on what you're doing, and jumping targets the block directly underneath you. I tried to make it feel as intuitive as possible and even allowed players to perform different types of speed bridging. In terms of the level design, I decided to place trees in front of the player's path to force them to learn how to break blocks, and I added a couple small cliffs to teach them how to build. However, I want the player to eventually go underground, so after the cliffs, I added a big drop into a pool of water down below. Water physics! And just to make sure the path is as clear as possible, I decided to add some arrows to the game. I wanted to put them in item frames so I could easily rotate and reuse them, but when testing, I noticed that the player could actually interact with them. I also noticed that I could eat the arrows for some reason. Don't ask why I tried it, just believe me. I guess arrows are a good diet if you want your weight to go down. So to prevent the player from interacting with the arrows, I decided to invert their item frame offset to go the other direction. This let me place them behind the sky and out of the player's reach, and it worked perfectly. I took this opportunity to add some flowers to the game too. But one thing, this solution does allow us to place sideways flowers, so we can just pretend that it doesn't and forget about it. But speaking of decoration, I felt like having the sky show in the dugout areas felt weird. So I added a bunch of different types of sky blocks that were just underexposed versions of the blocks around them to make the level feel easier to read. I think it actually helped a ton. But whatever you do, make sure you do not disable the resource pack. Oh boy. Next, I inset the sky blocks by 0.05 units, which caused the outer blocks you stand on to cast a soft shadow over the background called ambient occlusion. But you may notice that only the non-sky colored blocks have the ambient occlusion, and that's because I used sea lanterns specifically for the sky blocks, and you can't cast shadow on a light source. I tried adding background trees as well, but I felt they were too distracting and made the level harder to read, so I scrapped them. The next thing we needed to add to our game was animated floating items you can pick up, since games are more fun when you can get stronger up until the end. For example, the pickaxe will allow you to break more types of blocks, you know, like in Minecraft. But not only will all these items upgrade what you can do, they're also gonna act as respawn points for the player inside of our game. But speaking of respawn points, we still haven't added any danger for our player yet. So I extended the cave out a bit into a big ravine where the player's gonna encounter their first enemy. Now, we don't actually have any enemies yet to fill a ravine with, but we'll get back to that in 1 second. For now, I added a lava parkour room that requires you to use your new pickaxe to drop gravel into the lava to jump across. I also added the entire nether. Okay, maybe not the entire nether, but no one will notice. For the nether's challenge, they do have to bridge across a big pool of lava, and if they do it successfully, they will get an iron sword. Huh, I wonder what they're gonna need that for. I just used command blocks to make the portals teleport you back and forth, and it seemed good enough. And now it's time for the final room. The final room, sorry, I have something in my throat. I wanted the final room to be an abandoned mine shaft. I luckily already had a lot of the background blocks I needed from earlier, but the cobwebs were a little different. I had to change their whole model to be a full block just so they would barely stick out enough from the wall to appear flat. But overall, I think it looks pretty good. I did change one of the spider spawners into a water cave just so it didn't feel as repetitive. I also added a room to mine diamonds at the end of the mine shaft so the player has a way to win the game. Minecraft! But remember earlier when I said I wanted to add some enemies? It's time for that now. I experimented with using both spawners and command blocks, but for some reason they both kept spawning chickens instead of zombies. I've never seen this before, and I use command blocks frequently.
Research shows that nostalgia can help you remember ads, so customize and save with Liberty Mutual.
So I instead tried making a chain of command blocks that spawn zombies every time you go through the portal, and this one worked for some reason. I don't know, Minecraft's very poorly coded. We'll just ignore it for now. I then made some custom zombie sprites and inserted them into the pack. However, since I needed the zombies' AI to work naturally and they had to face the player to move, I couldn't apply the sprites to their head like I did for Steve. So instead, I had to tie an invisible armor stand to every zombie, where the armor stand is the one wearing the texture and it just teleports to the zombie every time it moves. This seemed to actually work out perfectly, or close enough. I tried to see if it would work for Steve too, but it made him feel very laggy and I didn't like it, so I put him back how he was. I set the world to midnight, which made the lighting feel a lot more colorful, and meant I also needed to swap all of the item frames for glowing item frames because the items got a little too dark. But overall, I was extremely satisfied with the level. So I went around doing some finishing touches like adding cave